Welcome to the Theory of Flight, read as part of the prescribed reading for the IEB English Home Language Curriculum for 2022. This is Part 2, History, Beaufort. As Golide Gumede watched the Vickers Viscount travel to the earth as a great ball of fire, he could not have known that retribution would be sought for this one act. This one act that made him a hero in the eyes of many and a villain in the eyes of many others. He understood the madness of war, that there was no rhyme or reason to its casualties, no clear lines between cause and effect. He could not have known that certain men with a jaundiced sense of justice would draw an undeviating line from the shooting down of the Vickers Viscount and follow it, like a river, to the Beaufort farm and estate, where their vengeance would flow like an everlasting stream. But, truth be told, the line reached further still, through Golide Gumede and beyond him, to connect him in the inexplicable and inextricable ways that only geography can. To Beatrice Bate Beaufort, the heiress of the Beaufort farm and estate, and one of the survivors of the downed Vickers Viscount. Two separate lives lived on the same patch of land, brought to such proximity by an idea that had germinated long before Golide and Beatrice came into being. In the mind of one Bennington Beaufort, as he sat in his armchair and smoked his pipe, watching the embers of a long unstoked fire slowly die, trying to quiet the disquiet that resided deep in his heart. The lush and verdant village of Guguka became the Beaufort farm and estate in much the same way that most of the villages became settler farms in the colonies. Bennington Beaufort, having had the misfortune of inheriting only the family name and none of its centuries' worth of fortune, dignity, or honor, due to his father's wild speculations, and having had the fortune of, absolutely by chance, distinguishing himself during the Great War, had decided that perhaps a life in the colonies would be just the thing for him. He had always fancied that if he made a go at being a gentleman farmer, he would be a great success at it. He had then set about looking for some land he could acquire through very little effort and at no great expense to himself. There were many colonies to choose from, and so it took quite a few years for him to find the right place. At 100 hectares, the place he settled on, Guguka, was adequate for his needs. Bennington was a fair-minded man and asked that the Africans who had lived on the land for centuries not be resettled. He had grand schemes for the Beaufort farm and estate, schemes that would require a labor force. It was not lost on him that a readily available labor force would be less expensive than a labor force that came from afar. Bennington was a very enterprising man, and he put the land and the people on it to good use. In just one decade, he made his farm one of the lifelines of the colony. He grew maize, sugarcane and cotton, reared cattle, sheep, pigs and chickens. He built refineries, butcheries and mills on his property. He turned the village into a modern compound and replaced the thatch mud rondavels with square concrete rooms under corrugated asbestos sheets. Everyone who lived on the compound worked in some capacity on the farm and estate, and because he was a generous man, he also built a school for the natives on his property. Having thus established himself, Bennington married Rosemary Bate, a woman from the purest pioneer stock who had never quite recovered from the tumble from a horse she had taken when she was a child. Rosemary was considerate enough to die soon after giving birth to a baby girl, Beatrice, thus providing Bennington with an heir, perhaps not of the right gender, but an heir nonetheless. During a trip to the Netherlands with her father, his young daughter had shown a liking for the sunflowers, and so Bennington had dedicated a few acres of his land to growing them. When the Second World War broke out, Bennington proved to be indispensable to the war effort. His cotton made the soldiers' uniforms, his canned goods fed the troops, and his leather made it possible to have boots on the ground. He became the wealthiest man in the colony. When he died in an unfortunate car accident in 1948, his only child and heir, Beatrice Bate Beauford, then became, at 11, the wealthiest person in the colony. At 13, Beatrice went to Evelyn High School with the distinction of being the daughter of the man most people thought instrumental to the colony's economic growth during and after the war. This guaranteed Beatrice respect and easy passage. However, Beatrice did not make it easy for those willing to grant her any privileges. She was a liberal-minded young woman whose ideas, especially on the rights and treatment of the African, terrified those around her, including Cookie Sedgwick, a girl who was to be her lifelong friend. Beatrice questioned and challenged everything and everyone, whereas Cookie never had an independent thought. Cookie had accepted wholesale the opinions and beliefs of her family, community, and country. She loved her family, she loved her community, she loved her country, and she never once thought they could be wrong, that they could all have contributed to the establishment and preservation of a system and order that was, at its very heart, unfair and unjust. Cookie did not quite agree with Beatrice's notions, even thought them foolhardy, but she could not help finding Beatrice's irreverence for all things that Cookie herself held dear seductive. Not quite brave enough to be as defiant as Beatrice, Cookie was happy just to live vicariously through her and know that an alternative way of thinking and being was possible. For her part, Beatrice never tried to make Cookie share her views. Beatrice was too self-assured, too convinced that her way of thinking was just, correct, and right. To look for converts. And because they never tried to change each other and simply accepted one another, Beatrice and Cookie became the best of friends. The only thing that threatened their bond was Emile Coetzee, a man whom Beatrice could never respect, a man whom Cookie loved and later married. After Evelyn, Beatrice left for Oxford University and returned 5 years later, perhaps predictably, as a hippie. It was the dawn of the 60s, the age for the Beatrices of the world to finally come into happy being. Never quite comfortable with the grandness of her inheritance, Beatrice turned the Beauford farm and estate into a multiracial commune, an artists' colony. She left the running of the Beauford farm to the foreman and did not seem to care either way whether he did a good job or not. But Emile Coetzee, Cookie's husband, did care about the Beauford farm and estate and how it was run. As head of the National Organization of Domestic Affairs, he found enough incriminating evidence of interracial commingling to bring a charge of unlawful conduct against all those who lived on the estate. Although equally appalled by things going on, the state was, however, hesitant to make them public and extremely reluctant to get on the wrong side of Beatrice Bate Beauford, who was still the wealthiest person in the country and whose farm was still vital to the nation, especially now that it seemed to be gearing up for a civil war.